Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Margaret Pennard. I'm a historical fiction and fantasy author and an eclectic reader, and welcome to Booktube. So, what is it today? It is Sunday today, and the purpose of today's live stream is a standalone book review. I don't do these often, so I've been waiting for a chance since February when I read this for Climathon 2025 to do a single book review because there is so much to cover here. Um, so that is what we're going to be doing today. This is part of Climathon 2025, which is co-hosted by Tasman and Anya, and you'll find their channels in the description down below. It's a year-long readathon where we're reading about various aspects of climate change and what we can do to make the world better, because I think we can all agree it could be better. Not, the planet necessarily, but just the human part of it. um, so I did want to bring to your attention next week's guests. Next week's guest is going to be a local. So as part of Climathon, I have started doing monthly-ish guest conversations, interviews where I ask people on about how they got to come to climate change and realize what it was doing to the world and how they show up and what matters most to them. And the guest next week is going to be Ali Shaw, who is a writer, an editor, a bookstore owner, and I'm very excited, and she's very nervous. So please give her a warm round of applause come next week, next Sunday morning, and make her feel at home. So that is Ali for the TRC, Truth and Reconciliation for the Climate, next week. And I think I'm ready for the book review. I'll just say hello to the chat. We had a Jocelyn in here earlier. Hello, hello. And a cat paw. Good morning. And an Albert. Hello, hello. Just to solve the mystery, Albert the conjugator. So beans, when they're actual beans, are legumes. But because coffee beans are called beans, they use that as a pun, even though coffee beans are actually seeds. They're part of the fruit. So that is the answer to that question. And here's the link if y'all want to put notifications on or anything else. So welcome. And let me know if you have questions as we go through. So I'll do some intros to this. So it's going to be a climate-related book because I've talked about Climathon already. But who is Paul Gilding? And the book is The Great Disruption. Now, this came out in 2011. So this is a big part of what I'm going to be discussing in the second part of this video. But in terms of the author, Paul Gilding is an Australian. He started out as a more radical environmentalist, doing protests and getting arrested and stuff. But then he pivoted to consulting with big businesses, which he's been doing, well, I think for a decade since he wrote this, so maybe 20 years now, with the intention of helping big corporations strategize how to turn the huge cruise ship of their part of the economy into something that is more sustainable. And he sort of disappeared. So I looked him up on LinkedIn, and he has a website, and the last website blog post is 2023. So we're going to talk a little bit about what I think is really great about this book, why I gave it 5 stars, and then the negatives, which were some questions and some kind of moments that I had with this book, and then lead to conclusions. So I have several. I whittled these down. This is not what I started out with. I sort of have narrowed it down to be able to talk about this and hopefully things that people will be interested in. So positives. We have the introduction to the Stockholm Resilience Center model. Now, I've talked about this, but I don't think I've named it that. The Stockholm Resilience Center is the place where a bunch of scientists came up with a circular model to show 9 different sectors in the circle. And each one was basically how much of that resource we're using in that system, and if we go past the budget of that resource for planet Earth. So maybe you've heard of the analogy of like how many Earths would we need if we continue to use energy and resources at the pace we are now. And, it's like 3 Earths. And like we don't have 3 Earths. So obviously we're going to have to change our behavior at some point. So this circle model with the 9 sectors talks about climate change, aerosols, biodiversity, fresh water. There's all these different like systems that have their own sort of logic, but they also influence each other. And so that's why it took a lot of scientists a lot of time and a lot of brain power to put this together. Now, when Paul Gilding came out with this in 2011, 15 years ago almost, 3 of those boundaries of the circle were already passed and were like from the green into the red. And when I checked this morning, and I'll put that in the chat in just a second, 6 of them had been transgressed. So give us another 15 years and we are 6 red, 3 green. So it has not gotten better. But I really like that model as a terms of seeing how things interrelate and seeing which ones we're worst at and where, you might want to focus the attention, if you will. So I'll pop that in the comments because I thought it was really interesting. They did have an update, I think, in 2024 for the latest findings, and they talked about what it meant. And some of the names don't exactly correspond, which could be a translation thing because this is in Stockholm, but I figured it out eventually, which means which, like biodiversity loss is actually called biosphere something like that. And yes, so that's in the chat. So good model to use, appreciate him using it and getting more people acquainted with it. Now, the next thing I thought that was really useful, and I'll bring my friend Marion into this discussion. On page 54, he talks about the need to give legitimacy to both logical and emotional responses. And I thought that was really clever because we have this huge disruption, if you will, coming down the pike, and we can have a response like flight, freeze, etc. But we have a emotional response like freeze, flight, or whatever, or a logical response. And I think he's sort of lightly saying, a lot of people haven't gotten over the emotional response, whether that's denial or anger or depression, to get to a logical response, which is, can we fix this? How do we fix this? What are the possibilities? So I thought that was a really great point. And here's where Marianne comes in. So I was just talking with her recently. She is from the channel Writer in Rwanda. And she said that, like, the Truth and Reconciliation for the Climate series that I'm running is more focused on the emotional response and sort of this facing up to the climate catastrophe that I feel like a lot of people aren't doing. I'm trying to encourage people to get in their feelings about it. And the fact that a lot of people do not engage is one of the ways that they are defending their psyches from the consequences, I think. And so this is why I'm trying to encourage people to be like, oh, if this means that, like, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my kids? What does that mean for the economy? What does that mean for nation states around the globe? And she pushed back a little and said that, well, that could be due to your media outlook. Like American media is highly persuasive, commercialized and biased. And, depending on what you choose to look for, you could be getting very different messaging. So she says she in Rwanda is getting very different messaging from the media and the world media than I would be in America. And that's a fair point, especially in we choose what we seek out. But I think another element to the emotional response piece is that I don't think Americans, and I'll just speak for Americans, have faced up to it yet. So even if our media was biased to apocalyptic, cataclysmic, whatever words you want to use, sensationalism, like that might be giving us the idea that the world is ending, and that's definitely a message I'm getting, but it's not from mainstream media, which I don't usually watch. It's from people reporting the science and books that I read for Climathon, right? I am not a mainstream media consumer. So what I see as the problem is not a biased media making people alarmist. It's people having gotten too much of that messaging and then turned off their alarm bells. It's like the boy who cried wolf. And so my my different approach is to try to say, "Hey, this is really real and really serious, and can we talk about this and what we're going to do together to try to survive and maintain a civilization?" So, that is my sort of thought, my esprit de l'escalier comment of thinking about what Marion said and coming back with something. Let's see. Yeah, knowledge is power. And I put the model link up there. Okay. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to pop them in the chat. So more positives. Page 57, we're trying to understand multiple lags in the system. So when I say I'm more frightened by the science, here's one of the things that I think he made really clear. The lag in the system. So yes, we've known about climate change for 50 years, and a lot of people tried to hide it. That's a separate issue. Just think about this part. A lot of CO2 equivalent had to be pumped into the atmosphere for the effects to start showing up because it's a big bank, like it can take a lot of CO2 equivalent, right? And so it took a lot of that filling up before we noticed the effects, before we could measure them, before we believed it. So that's one lag. Like we're already way over here, right? And then there's going to be another lag when we do actually have a mass, like a critical mass of remedies, which is, the clean energy, which is deducing, but also carbon capture if we can, or reforestation if we can. The things that we can do to try to take CO2 equivalent out of the atmosphere. That's going to take time. Some of it's instant, but like the projects and the growth and all that is not. So like the lag of that effect going, the lag of those projects going into effect, it has a lag on its own. So the time there is just like we're so far into this before we before we realize, right? So that's not a great feeling, but it's a good point to point out. Close into that, page 59. So the fact that we took so long and the fact that we haven't had the critical mass of responses, not only 2011, but 2025, means that when we do respond, we're going to have to respond to the consequences of past behavior, right? From the Industrial Revolution up to now, all that feeding into the system and spitting out the consequences that we're dealing with now. Ocean acidification, polar ice cap melts, sea level rise, faster storms, droughts, et cetera, et cetera. But while we're coping with these things that are already there's already like a lot in the system that is going to be happening. We're doing it with diminished capacity because our resources have been degraded by the effects that we're already seeing. So like climate change for 200 years built up this mass consequence list, right? Like if you want to say detentions, we have 100 detentions waiting to come down the line. And so now we're having to deal with all these detentions with I don't know what would that, I didn't think out this analogy. With no time after school because we already spent that time goofing off and going to sports practice or whatever else. So there's like we're trying to do more with less. That's the point that I'm trying to make. Yeah. All right, page 70. If any of you have heard of John Maynard Keynes, he's a famous economist. Get my nerd glasses on here. He envisioned a time when humans would prefer to devote our further energies to non-economic purposes. So here's where I get on my little anti-capitalist horse. Keynes was like 1930s, right? He was the one who took us out of the Depression, or right before he gave the theories for us to use to get out of the Depression, um, with not supply side, because that's a Republican hobby horse, but um, anyway, the New Deal approaches, right? It's not coming to my brain right now. And with his economic theories, at the beginning of the 20th century, he said capitalism is built to reach a point where we work so much and we have so much efficiency that we have a lot of leisure. And now we can think about other things to do with our time besides working ourselves to survive. And a lot of people agreed with that. And it just never happened because the people who were in charge of capitalism said, well, no, because if you stop working to survive, then we don't get any more profits. So we're going to make sure that you have to keep working to survive. So that that's my, is it a conspiracy theory? I mean, it's like a fact, right? So just to let you know that economics, the dismal science, had people who thought it would actually improve our lives, but it got captured by people who are after more and more profits. That is my take on the situation. Another cool thing about this book, and from 2011, is that on page 92, he predicts the pandemic. So he said there's going to be a breakdown, a crash at some point. And I said, how prophetic, in my notes, because he said whether it's another terrorist attack or a global pandemic that shuts down something, it's going to be shocks upon shocks upon shocks. And I went, global pandemic, you don't say. So some of the positives about this book is that he has predicted the falling down the chute that is happening to us. He just didn't predict the biggest thing correctly, which I'll get to in the second portion. Let's see, 97. We need to first accept that things will get ugly physically, economically, psychologically. And he says, see James Kunstler, The Long Emergency, which I have not read. But basically, it's preparing ourselves. And I think this is another really good point. So preparing ourselves at the beginning, I said, both emotionally and logically to respond to this big crisis. It's hard to accept that life will get worse. And I don't know the time scale on this. So I could be anticipating it much too soon, and my life will be lived out pretty much normal with like the same privileges that I've been accustomed to. But it could not, and it could like happen before 2100 when I'm still alive. We'll see. We'll see. So accept those things, that they will get ugly. And number two, the change will be, and here's where it really echoed this book, which I like more, which is also 5 stars. I Want a Better Catastrophe by Andrew Boyd. Accept that change will be discontinuous, chaotic, and transformational, meaning we're not going to have a measured change. It's not going to be, okay, everyone ration this out and we'll move to this policy. Everyone sign up for this program and we'll provide these goods and services. Like, government obviously has not been up to it. So discontinuous, chaotic, transformational. And number 3, change will require major mindset shift and behavior change, both personal and collective. So this is my little gremlin look, right? This is what I'm trying to propagate with this series. Like, get yourselves ready, think things through, talk to your community, try to find your like-minded individuals that will help with mindset change and who will be on the same page as you. And number 4, it's about saving civilization, not the planet. Right. So in case no one realizes this, like, the planet will be fine. It's just like humans and all the achievements that we've amassed over the centuries is not sustainable. So that's what we're going to be losing. That's what I would really miss. And future generations would probably miss out on. And that's what we're trying to save. So yeah. So that was really good. Let's see. We've got a fun little quote here on page 102. So one of the things that, like, I think people talk about is climate deniers, even at this late date. Right? You used to look at people who are saying, like, if you're talking about climate change, you're a lunatic. And he has a really great out for this, and I really appreciated this when I came upon it. Climate deniers don't matter. One, because as with an alcoholic in denial, no amount of data will change their minds, right? It's not irresponsibility. They are the equivalent of an addict. They are in denial, and no amount of data will change their minds. And number two, the physical science will overwhelm them in the end. So if if they were caught in a landslide, if they were caught in a flash flood, hey, maybe they'll change their minds, right? But until the physical science is directly under their nose and affects them, I don't know, Texas, maybe. Um, it's not our responsibility, you know? That was that made me feel better. Oh, there's that. Um, let's say he had a really great line that's just like a quote, page 183. He said, "There is surely no greater injustice than the elimination of your country's existence." And he's talking about island nations that could vanish, or nation states borders that could disappear, or earthquakes or droughts, or the unlivable portions that would just have to be evacuated. No greater injustice, and we're all about the justice here, than the elimination of your country's existence, especially when it's done for the sake of more cup holders in your car. And I just like, oh, that's so good, right? So if we in the energy rich West are upgrading our cars, are putting extra trim on our third house, are, I don't know, wasting resources basically for the sake of more cup holders in your car, that decision, our decisions add up, and the collective is like mismanaging resources, and that is making life very unfair for people on the other side of the world or generations to come. So that really hit a nerve with me. Another point is he talks about how the Department of Defense has definitely been planning for climate change for quite a while, even in 2011. They've got war games planned out, kind of like what you would do in a simulation. I don't know if Ven's not going to watch this, but he's been doing video gaming, and it sounds sounds like a simulation of what you would do in an apocalyptic moment. So, they Department of Defense in America has definitely gone through the steps of how things will fall apart. Like how is this going to fall down the chute, right? The 1 degree war plan means if 1 degree of warming on average happens, what will happen to the earth? What will happen to the governments? What will we need to do in that case? Just projecting. So they have phases. Policies include limiting the production of virgin aluminum. So these are the things that I sort of like paid attention to in terms of, okay, so what are the resources that are the most energy intensive to extract that I do not want to waste? Virgin aluminum. So like not recycled aluminum. Cement. Oh God, cement. Iron. Interesting. Plastics, right? We know that one. Forest products. Good. No deforestation. And so I thought that was neat because that is, hey, they've got all the budget. Why can't they do some of the climate planning, right? And so just those to keep my eye on. Page 197, another positive point that I appreciated. I have read a book called Half Earth Socialism, and you may have heard of people talking about how much resources we need in terms of how many Earths, right? If everyone on the Earth, the 9 billion people, used resources the way an average American does, how many Earths would we need to sustain that? Because food, agriculture, energy, transport, all that stuff. We need 7 Earths or whatever it is. And yeah, it doesn't exist, right? So it's sort of dreaming, but in a way that will hopefully help us visualize or conceptualize how much we need to cut back. So we can't use the available land for all solutions. So one of the things that Paul Gilding does is talk about potential solutions that will not work. And one of them is making everything that is made from plastic now made from natural resources. Like you use forestry products to make cars or whatever, And sure, great idea on a small scale, but if you have to make forests work for cars and then you need forests to make feed for animals that we're growing for food, and then you need forests for carbon capture, you're counting the same forest 3 times, and you don't have them 3 times, you have them once, right? So that was just an important thing about sort of accounting. You can't count the same resource twice if you only have one Earth. So you must prioritize your goals, meaning you're going to have to toss out the cars. You're going to have to find a better way to get around because you can't use all that plastic and all that iron for cars, or whatever it is. Maybe they're not made of iron and steel anymore. So prioritize goals and abandon the lesser ones. So food versus car materials versus paper. Oh, do we not get to use paper anymore? Versus timber for like housing, carbon absorbers, biofuels, etc. So when people say, "Oh, we'll switch from gasoline to biofuels," yeah, how many forests are you counting? How many times? So that was a great point. One of the solutions he talked about was shifting the tax base from employment to materials. And I thought this was great on so many levels, right? So, number one, taxing things usually discourages people from using that thing, right? Not with employment, but with other things, with other types of taxes. So if we tax materials, we cut down on like harvesting, extraction, high energy, and they can go to what their highest priority use is, right? But also, um, if you shift taxes from employment, that means people are not uh, people who are in different employment situations, such as myself, where there's lots of gig workers nowadays or people in precarious employment. Um, they have more freedom to be more flexible and not in a way that makes them more vulnerable to um, extraction or vulnerable to bad employment practices. So, yes, encouraging part time work and less consumption. So, I really liked that solution. I thought that was a great one. One of the questions he asked made me think of Speed and that whole pop quiz asshole moment from Keanu Reeves. And the question was, when things start to collapse, would we let whole regions collapse into chaos and draw lines on the map that we would defend? So, this is a really interesting question for people who are um, from Western countries and used to being around the world as peacekeepers, for example. Um, how do you know what will affect you outside your country? What is your responsibility to promote global peace? How how do you forecast whether or not something a continent away is going to arrive at your door eventually? This is more of like an existential question and humanity question, like ethics, which I'm not very good at, but I'm curious if you have questions, if you have thoughts about this one, because again, I asked a friend about this one and they had a good answer, but I think not one that's going to get us to cooperation. So I'm kind of like looking for more thoughts on this to contribute. So if we don't let whole regions collapse into chaos and draw lines on the map and put up walls, how do we cooperate without the transport, without the communications, without all the convenient technologies that we're used to? How do we manage? Because the global government thing is not it's not working. Um, so the final positive point I had also has to do with readathon that I'm involved in with the How to Do Nothing. I won't get it out of the stack right now, but the Jenny Odell book. And that is on page 203. The global economy could face a major crisis just with a change of public mood. This could be the Aikido of political revolutions, a small, well placed move that uses the energy of the attacker to change the whole system. And I went, yes, yes, yes. This is a beautifully written metaphor. I love it. So if you don't know Aikido, it's a martial art that basically, I think it stands for no, that's karate, empty hand. Anyway, Aikido is more about using the momentum of movement and working with it rather than trying to like constantly collision or impact. So the idea, the image here is that you have the attacker, which is the big corporations who don't want to change, who want to keep polluting at our expense, and you have them moving forward, and they want profits. And instead, we say, your profit is not as important as our health. Like, duh, dude. And so we step back, and their pushing forward makes them fall flat on their face, right? So that's sort of the idea of using the momentum and the aikido of political revolutions. I was like, yes. And we've seen a little bit of that this year, which is delightful. But I really loved that imagery, and I think I'm gonna like take that. I wish I had like a sticker sort of campaign that I could put that on. That'd be good. But the way this relates to how to do nothing is that it concludes with how do you market to anti-consumers? Meaning, if you want to encourage anti-consumerism and decrease consumption under capitalism, which is what we have, how do you encourage that? How do you market to that? How do you persuade people to that? Because all the persuasive power and marketing has been used previously to make people buy. So how do we aikido that? And that is one of the points that Jenny Odell makes in How to Do Nothing, I think chapter 4, which I'm going to review next Wednesday with my wrap up. And that is doing nothing in the meaning of like getting your attention back, getting your wholeness back, instead of being so subservient in your attention to corporations. And yeah, she's in the same space because she wants to persuade people to find the answers in themselves and in community, rather than surrender up your what's the word I'm looking for? Self what's the word I'm looking for? Surrender up your autonomy. Because it's too hard to think about things. And so you let someone else decide. You let the company decide what's the easiest thing to do with your morning, you know? So I thought that was really, really great. And I like how, again, the biblioserendipity of this is smashing, because every time I read another climate book, sometimes it references a previous one, sometimes it references a fiction book that I'm reading. It's great. So I like having things reference each other, like Half Earth Socialism, which wasn't a very fun book to read. How to Do Nothing, which is a very fun book to read on the slow reread that I'm doing with Grace. And then this one, which is, I've read the pieces that I've flagged several times now, and I'm digesting them for you guys and hopefully summarizing it in a way that makes it interesting. Let's see if the chat has any comments. Hi, Maggie. Good morning. And this is so long ago, I don't know. 1019. Yeah. Sorry. Hi, Melissa. That's a helpful stance. 2025 is the year of the Delulu in many ways, Maggie, many ways. Melissa says, I no longer waste my energy trying to convince people of facts they don't believe, no matter the data. Oh, okay. So this is about the climate deniers. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Maggie says, our population is addicted to plastic. Yes. Yes. KPop says cement is so bad for the environment. Yes. Yes. You guys know all the facts. You're good. KPop says, indeed, Maggie, you see all these alternative plastic inventions come out, but where is it? Does it get silenced? No producers, investors? Yeah. Plastic inventions. You say alt plastic. I might need some more information here. Where is it? Does it get silenced? Are you talking about non-plastic inventions? And then where do the resources come from? And who are you talking about getting silenced? I think I've missed a little bit of the nuance here because I'm late getting to the comments. Sorry. Maggie says, here in Colorado, a lot of people on the lower income scale work more than one job because it costs $102K per person per year to live unless you already own your home. Yeah. Unaffordable, unsustainable. And Maggie says, you know that quote about the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he doesn't exist? That is a good quote. That is a good quote. In the 90s and 2000s, plastic companies convinced the world that plastic was not part of the petroleum problem by convincing everyone that plastic was recyclable. It really isn't. Yeah. Yeah, denialism. Yeah. It's the corporation allowing you to surrender your autonomy and not think about things on your own. Yeah, Kappa is pointing to that comment. Maggie says anti-consumerism is a unicorn or a demon depending on who you ask. Oh, well, I'm all for it. So Paul is here. It's been a while. Paul says, when I do nothing, the lawn turns into a briar patch. Oh, so you get blackberries, do you? We're just getting ours coming out a little bit right now. Not quite sweet yet. Jocelyn says yes in response to something. And Maggie says parts of it were preachy, parts of it were idealized to the point of being fantasy. Others were totally on point. Not sure which one you're referring to. Sounds like a book. And Catpaw says there's been cactus plastic last week and tapioca starch plastic a few years ago. Avocado pit single-use cutlery. Oh my gosh. So this is what you're talking about. Is it silenced? Let me see what you're asking about. No producers, investors. Oh, I think I know what you mean. So there are alternatives, but they never get scaled up. And I think the answer, or part of the answer, besides being that the people already making plastics are big enough to kick them out of the market and not let them get a foot in the market, is that you can't scale this up to the same scale that plastic is at while also meeting all the other needs. Like I was saying, you need 7 Earths to live the same way, and you can't count the same forest 5 times for your biofuels, for your carbon capture, for your forest products, for your, tropical forest products or whatever, like fruit and stuff. Jocelyn says, plastic isn't recyclable? I will let... Oh, okay. Maggie's read this book. Okay, and then let me go back. Parts of it were preachy, parts of it were idealized. Yeah, okay, so I haven't gotten to the negatives. I've just gone through my positive points and I'm pausing to catch up with the chat. So we're gonna hit the negatives next. There's one big one and then a few other questions I had that were sort of like skeptical. So yeah. Maggie says cornstarch plastics got tons of attention, but turned out to be just biodegraded into tinier pieces of plastic residue when the cornstarch breaks down. It's a mix and you still use plastic. Ugh. Yeah, that sounds like a bit of a scam. Justin says, I never heard that before. We see labels on plastic bottles about recycling all the time. So there's 6 different types that are purported to be recyclable. I think maybe 1 to 3 are the ones that are able to be recycled in the US. And then some of the others were shipped off to China and burnt here or just end up in the ocean. And the problem is that, yeah, it's a cover for let us keep making this stuff. We'll pretend that it's all closed system. And what Maggie's pointing out is that it's really a PR job. So just be careful and maybe look into what happens to your recycling, because that can be really interesting and disillusioning, obviously. I want to read that book. Yeah, it's good. It's a good one. Great disruption. Kappa says, and the reuse of turning plastic into oil for industry a decade ago was so interesting. And now where is it? Yeah, squashed by the monopoly markets. I would hazard a guess. Maggie says ethanol from grain takes so much energy to make and no one wants to pay the extra. Yeah, that the ethanol. the corn mirage never came into reality. Yeah. Okay, so that is the great positive points and the really good, thorough discussion that I got from this book and why I thought it was 5 stars, because it had a lot of points that I was curious about and a lot of research and a lot of experience. Now for the negative side. So the one big negative is that it was written in 2011 and it is full of people and governments won't be able to avoid changing for the climate to address it. And we're 15 years later since he wrote it in 2010 and nothing has gotten better. So the biggest flaw is that 15 years ago, his thesis, his this is a doom message, but like you can be hopeful with my book because we're going to disrupt the economy. And don't think that he chose disrupt because it's got such good tech bro implications on a whim, right? I'm sure that was related. But like the positive is that like it's so obvious. We won't have any choice but to react to it and go all in like a World War II, like rationing, like big investments, like powering down gas and coal plants, like all this stuff, right? It is precisely the severity of the problem that will drive a response. That was page 2 and page 7. And I was like, not yet. Not yet. Have we heard a peep? Have we heard any sort of government response in the US to people who are like, "Can we do something about this?" No. No. Um, I think I took out oh, no, page 163. Given that all the world's major governments and most major companies have agreed not to go past 2 degrees of warming, the logic of the economic risk flows pretty easily. And that's just a bunch of, like, stupid language to say, it's obvious they're gonna address this. They've pledged themselves, which I think is what Maggie was talking about, maybe naive or idealistic on this guy's part. He's consulting with the businesses, and so I'm kind of not understanding how he has this outlook. It's a bit weird to me, that this is his conclusion, this is his position. My comment on that was, "Nope." Like, they just opt out. They just step out of the treaty. They just deny that it ever happened, because we've graduated to a new brand of idiot in office. So, and unfortunately, that reflects idiots in the population who vote for the denialism and can't face up to grappling with a serious crisis. So, okay. A question that I had, page 122. Supporters of the old economy will need to go all out, just as the parallel new economy will. Okay, so if you heard my last time I talked about a climate thing, I talked about how it being really encouraging to me that that this book talked about forming a parallel system, a local system of like a tribe, an apocalypse now tribe, that you can rely on so that you have a local emergency community that we have medical, we have shelter, we have food and water for so ever long, and we have skills that we can like survive, right? Um, and then you have a market, and then you can build up, and then you can save a little bit of civilization here and there, right? That is my goal. Maybe not my lifetime. Again, maybe I'll have the time frame wrong, but like this is what I'm going to try to cultivate for my little piece of activism. And what he says is, and how I visualize that is like we're trying to build a small train so that the runaway train that we are on and we have no control over will have somewhere to jump to. So we'll have lots of little things where people can jump out of the flaming building and hopefully land with a small local community who knows how to survive. So here he says supporters of the old economy will need to go all out, just as the parallel new economy will as well. So I think what he's envisioning, Paul Gilding, is that like the clean energy that's being decimated right now with cuts to the budget, the you know, capacity, the new industry, the whatever we're doing to build up alternatives to petroleum products. We need that to go all out to be able to have any expectation of like some of the things and conveniences that we live with, like electricity or running water, and safe and healthy food supply, things like that. Um, and I don't think they're on board. I think that rather than admit they're wrong and change course, the supporters of the old economy, meaning I think to me, the people who are in power now, so the elite, the billionaires, the people who are pulling the levers of government at this moment, it, I don't think they will give up their fight to more profit for themselves. Um, Ever. It doesn't sound like it. And here's the thing, here's the quote that On page 173, Paul Gilding says, "Do you really think we'll do the assessment? Can we afford to save civilization? Or would we rather keep our energy costs down while we hurtle off the cliff into collapse? Of course we won't. Unfortunately not. Unfortunately, we have arrived 15 years later many times at that question, and the people in power who are making the big business decisions or refusing to cooperate with government have chosen the price of eggs over not hurtling over a cliff into collapse. So that means we won't be able to afford saving civilization in all cases. So, I mean, it's some really good questions. I just think he misses the answer because it's 15 years ago and he hasn't seen what we've graduated to yet. Now, I have no idea what the political situation is like in Australia. I know the UK and the US are like neck and neck for loser of the century. But I don't know what Australia and New Zealand are like. He's in Tasmania, which I think is part of Australia. So who knows? Maybe they're doing better down there. Page 160, he says it's not really a hard choice when you're faced with like this or else. And I said, yeah, well, it's 15 years later, bud. Apparently it is. Um, and then on page 141, I disagreed with this quote. A study of history indicates that we will, in the end, embark upon a crisis response to climate change. So he's thinking like, well, okay, so in World War II, we stayed out, we stayed out, not our business, we're isolationist, right? And then when we were hit, we finally were like, okay, well, I guess we're in this and we're going to go all in. We're going to ration, we're going to build up capacity, we're going to conscript and do all these things, right? And so it was all guns blazing. But the more plausible model in my mind is the Don't Look Up film. Um, that seems more realistic to me. We are now a satire. Like it does not feel like a community that will all pull together. It feels like people who will not believe their eyes and who will continue on their track of convenience and denialism, rather than face up to responsibility and change. There, that's my quote. That is what I want to put on my screen for the thumbnail for this. We are now a satire. So yeah, that's something that just turned out to be completely wrong. What else besides so the big point that he was wrong, that we haven't confronted this, that we seem to love our luxuries rather than saving civilization. Okay, so two last little points on the negatives. Page 229. He describes an inflation of consumerism and less satisfaction. So let me see what exactly that is because I was just paraphrasing here. So here we have the killer blow to economic growth and the solution to many of our social issues. Well, that seems a little facile. First, the killer blow. Inequality, it seems, is an issue with extraordinary leverage on the whole system, and pulling that lever would have substantial social and economic impacts. It will reduce our obsessive focus on economic growth and therefore pave the way for acceptance of its now inevitable demise. Here's why. We support growth and drive it hard through the political process based on the incorrect assumption most of us hold that having more money and stuff will make us happier. Okay, we know that isn't true. I think most of us here in my community would admit that. We're firmly addicted at the personal level to more stuff. The problem is that the process of acquiring it, blah, 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 self-replicating cycle of dissatisfaction and greater want. We believe more wealth will satisfy us, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so EXP, what did I mean? So I was asking about one of the economic factors. So I'm used to looking at these graphs and the axes and the things and supply and demand. And when you're talking about consumerism, it's good for business because people demand more, and you put out more, right? You sell more. But the thing is, when you encourage this to a ridiculous degree, you're also encouraging inflation, and that does things to employment and business capacity and interest rates. And that's when I sort of get into the, okay, how is this all affecting everything? Because everything affects different things, and like, how does it all work together? And that's where I don't know where the graph ends up. So someone who is more versed in economics, I would love to have address that issue. How does currency inflation affect the answer to the question above about the best range of inequality. So he's talking about inequality will eventually like shoot itself in the foot, right? You can't have such a level, you can't have such a Gini coefficient that the tiny, tiny 0.0001%, like we have now, the billionaires, get all the stuff, and then the massive people are just trying to survive. Eventually that turns itself on its head because you can't assure the security of the 0.0001%. And before that happens, you don't have anyone to buy your crap to keep you at that elite level. So there's things going on here that I'm wondering about. Of course, they have the money to then bend the government to their will, and they do things like snatch people off the streets. So, I mean, that could be the answer, is that you get an authoritarian state. So that's one question. And then on page 252, hold on a second. Let me look at the chat while I get a drink. Oh, I missed a bunch. You guys are fast. Okay, ethanol and grain. Maggie's saying this recycle symbol is a lie. Yeah, they're just hauling plastic to the dump. Cat pasta, same. Jocelyn is having the wool ripped from her eyes as we speak. I'm sorry, Jocelyn. Look into it in your area. People might be active on this issue and be holding people to account, but you do need to look at your local, I think, county government probably, and see what they're doing and see if there have been any articles about exposés, stuff like that for your county and state. Truer words, Jocelyn. Now that's a bunch of foolishness on their part. Yeah. Maggie says, since then, they have built huge wind turbine fields, and now we have massive amounts of fiberglass blade waste and fiberglass particles in soil and beach sand. Fiberglass everywhere. I don't know that the wind turbine fields are the highest source of that fiberglass. Yeah. But Maggie's got an interesting point. Wanted to know why the blades were made of bamboo or balsa. Why, or why they couldn't be? Weren't. Okay, yeah, gotcha. Or carbon fiber. Maggie says, yeah, many of the companies actually do the recycling shut down during the pandemic. There isn't a big enough market for recycled plastic slag. Wow. Whenever you see stuff made from recycled plastic, there must always be new petroleum chemicals added to the slag to make hard plastic. Yeah. It's like, is it diminishing returns? Is that the same idea? You can't make something completely from the old thing. You always have to add something new to it, which, if you don't need a thing in the first place, should not be an instigator or an inducement to purchase something. It's true. You learn something new every day right here, folks. I love it. Maggie says, individually, it isn't a hard choice, but on the mass population scale, people like their conveniences. Yes, community, collectives. Hi, Richard. He addresses this in the book. Now, I'm not going to go into this because I think it's a side issue to focus on energy when it's sort of like society-wide. But he does address this with the waste question, the safety question, and supply, which he doesn't address. He explains the waste and the safety, but not the supply limit. And I don't know what he means by that, but Eva is here. Hello. Maggie says, someday, millions of years, they will find a petroleum plastic layer demarking this era of time. I mean, it's going to be an ocean layer under new ground when there's been like sea level rise and it's receded, right? It's going to be a long time from now. Exactly. Yeah. It's a divisive issue, the nuclear thing, which is part of the problem. Okay, Maggie's talking about enriching radioactive materials from weapons into power plants. Yeah, but the paper disappeared. Oh, conspiracy theories come back. There we go. I think because it made too much sense, but it was probably because it revealed too much military secrets. Oh, well, okay, security again. Supportive thoughts. Did Jocelyn say? Oh, okay. I don't know the context, but yeah, okay. Yeah. Richard says, I'm seeing more consumer products made of post-consumer recycled plastic, which, as Maggie detailed, means that they're using some new and some old. So if it's not something you really need, you still shouldn't be induced to buy something you don't need. Just a good point. Yeah, it's greenwashing. Okay, I'm going to return to my last little negative here, which has to do with social media. So on page 252, Paul Gilding is trying to feature social networks' power, but what we're seeing instead, in my opinion, is the downfall of networks because of social media. So let me open this one because it was an interesting quote as well. What is the relevance of the power of these social networks in our case? Quite simply, it shows how behavioral and attitude change can lead to a cascade of change once people in prominent positions in the social network are converted. When something becomes normal or socially expected, it can spread rapidly. That's true. With our social networks now global, it's easy to see how fast an idea like shop less, live more could spread. And here's my two things here. In the Jenny Odell book, How to Do Nothing, which I'm doing a slow reread with Grace on, she talks about networks connectivity versus sensitivity. Now, these words have different meanings in different contexts, so hold on. Connectivity means how connected you are, right? How many nodes are on the network, how fast they get the message, how fast they pass it on. That's all. There's absolute value. There's no positive or negative. It's just speed and rate of commission. Translation, passing it on, whatever the word I'm looking for is. But sensitivity involves less than the absolute value. Sensitivity involves, can you, what's the word I'm looking for? Why? Can you parse the message? Can you realize whether it's an alarm that is worth sending on? Can you make a judgment call? Right. And then in the social networks, what Jenny Odell discusses is that we are going from a more sensitive social network where you would see an article and go, oh, media literacy, that's not real. I'm not going to tell people that's real. Right. To a different kind of social network online where people are less media literate because of technology and just pass something on. They retweet, they reshare, they do not question the source before passing it on. And so we're getting lots of information overload without the skepticism or the critical thinking skills to evaluate that thing before we pass it on. There's too much coming on. The zone is flooded and we are too connective. We are just passing things on and communicating like a virus, things that are not necessarily worthy of being passed on, let's say. And so I thought that was a really great point, and that is what I think links into this here. I think we're seeing the downfall of networks because of the speed up of transmission and a communication of ideas, where there are fewer and fewer worthy ideas of being spread. It's like AI books, for example. And if you're curious about AI, you can watch. Maggie, is it on your channel? You had a great discussion last Sunday of AI in the book world. So if you want to pop that link down in the chat, I would love, because that's a great discussion. It's a side discussion to this, but a great discussion about social networks and the message for society. So yeah, I have less faith in that than Paul Gilding did 15 years ago. Oof, oof, oof. Chat. I'm so glad you guys are here with this discussion. This is great. Oh, okay. I said this about Jocelyn, so it may not be a good characterization. And Melissa says, the wool is being ripped from her eyes, which in my experience benefits from having supportive pals. Good point. Fair point. So yeah, it's the disillusion is not a fun feeling for sure. And Melissa says, I always appreciate supportive pals and I'm discovering disappointing information. Yeah. Yeah. So that's part of why I said, look into your area. It might be doing something wrong. It might have been held to account. It might have a better plan. You never know. And then you could share with us like how well they're doing. Are they better than average or worse? And then what you're going to do in response. That would be neat. Jocelyn says, I think Melissa's talking about where you mentioned talking to local leaders about the recycling. Yeah, got it. I've caught up. Thank you. Learning a lot from this live stream too. Yes, excellent. Mega says, I like glass cups, wood and metal containers, beeswax covered cotton instead of cling wrap. But it is a lot of work to keep things clean and sterile versus use once and toss plastics. Exactly. I think what I've come down to in terms of this is that there are people who need those things. And so the less I use them, the more they have the minimum allotted for the world, you know? Like if we are going to ration cling wrap and some people need it for hospital use or like disabled people need straws, that kind of thinking, then the more I feel better about, okay, well, then they get to use it because they need it and they don't have an alternative. Whereas I just have I have 5 plastic bags drying right now. Um, and I put them on top of the toaster, and as long as the bottom of the plastic bag doesn't touch the toaster when I toast, it helps heat and, like, dry the bag and doesn't melt it. I've got, a fairly workable system here. I always have more bags than I have places to put them to dry easily, but there are ways that we can definitely use beeswax-covered cotton instead of cling wrap, things like that, which I love. Melissa says, where I live in Oklahoma, there isn't a whole lot of political support on this, but there are some people talking about it. Yay! Trying to be encouraged by those who are going against the grain here. Yes, yes. Richard says, media of all stripes being so nakedly biased and not objective hasn't helped. I don't know which one you're talking about here, whether it's the social network or the nuclear thing. Let me know. Maggie says, ever since the Smith-Mundt Act was repealed, which I'm not familiar with, it is no longer illegal for media companies and the government to lie to us all. Is this to do with like the both sides like giving equal time to that, or is it fact checking? Sounds like it might be fact checking. Maggie agrees with Richard. Maggie says, breaking the block. Yay! Creatives versus AI. Okay, so this is the discussion that I watched and commented on afterwards. I would encourage anyone watching this and interested in AI and technological solutions to society's problems to take a gander and comment because it's a really great discussion. Richard says they're planning on powering AI servers with nuclear energy. Just all the no's. Melissa says, oh, I misunderstood. I was listening at that point, but not watching the chat. Okay. Yeah, that was me saying it. And I'm sketchy about attributing every chat comment. It's true. Maggie says 3 Mile Island is back online just to support a data storage center and server farm, which I think is what Richard was saying. Exactly. Yeah. Paper straws. No, I mean like real straws for people who need them. Helium should be for manufacturing and medical use only and never for balloons. Right. Things like that. Like if you if you have something that you realize, oh, this is a profligate use of a resource that is really quite finite and should be saved for people who need it. Can we not make that like a public service campaign or public information campaign? As long as these sustainable solutions work as well, I can get on board. Paper straws do not. And we don't need straws, period. If we're fine, healthy individuals who don't have trouble swallowing, like why are we using straws if they're plastic? Just don't. Catpaw says it's on my watch leader list. Haven't caught up after being offline for 10 days. Yes, a big move will do that. The shock. We're glad to see you here back and commenting. I'd love to see your emoji profile, whatever I want to call the picture. Richard says, balloons make me anxious, so I can get on board with getting rid of helium balloons. There we go. And I have no idea what Mylar is made of, but those fancy, like, shiny ones that don't deflate as fast, like, that's got to be evil, right? I mean, just throwing it out there. All right, so to conclude, my thing about this book is interesting. So he's been proven wrong, right? It's a 15-year-old book. He's been proven wrong that we would act to turn around climate change and prevent consequences. And there's no follow-up. So to me, like, it's sort of a big gap. I went on his LinkedIn. He has a website. The last blog post is from 2023. That's 2 years ago. And it says, yeah, the time is now. So to me, um, this is really lacking in terms of his environmental chops or engagement or whatever at this point. I don't question his background, his experience, his knowledge. But putting that blog post up 2 years ago and saying, follow my Substack to find out more, it's a little weird, not very communitarian. This book, the catastrophe book, feels a lot more honest, um, because as an individual, it gives you sort of a guide of dealing with facing these consequences, which can feel like a grief process. It tells you to seek out counsel. It gives you lots of resources, and it presents models for action. So he interviews, I don't know, like 8 different people and their different approaches to responding to this. So it sort of takes the science for granted, which this basically does as well, because they're political books, they're reaction books, they're social science books. They're how do we react to this big crisis once people realize that it's real, you know? And this one feels more honest. And this guy keeps saying, see, I'm right. Now we have to change. Now society will have to change now. And he doesn't detail the mechanisms. And with all his experience, he should be well placed to discuss, because if he's been consulting with businesses for 2 decades now, it's like, you know what they're lobbying for. You know how they're working the systems. Maybe it's different in Australia again, but he's worked with multinational companies and in the US. So I don't feel as good about um, his activism since this book, but this is a really good discussion point for people who are just coming to learn and like face up to the crisis. So, 5-star book for what it details, but since then, like, not my go-to person. I would recommend. I want a better catastrophe. So that is my book review. So I've got a couple announcements which have to do with Climathon, so just hang in there. I've got a banner for this one. This is the book we just talked about, which I could have had up, which I forgot. Please subscribe if this has been fascinating to you and you're engaged in learning new things and want to talk more about it, because I do this every month. And here's the next thing that is coming up, right? So we've got Truth and Reconciliation for the Climate, which you may or may not engage with, but the next thing I have coming up is a little bit broader. It's Agitation August, which is every weekday in August, just about. I'm interviewing a guest on the channel. They're coming on with their book that shook them up, right? That got them agitated, that got them into an activist space or engaged with a new community or advocating for change in some arena, right? So it's a vast list of topics, and I'm very excited to talk about them. I've started on my reading list because I am buddy reading all 16 of these books, I think, with folks. And that means that I'm going to be asking them very pointed discussion questions. And in some cases, they will be leading those discussion questions. But I'm excited to talk about these fellow booktubers who have a book that they think is really important and will add to this discussion about how do we make our society a better place. And so, yeah, that is coming up. I've got 2 bingo cards because along with the interviews and the stuff on the channel, it's always fun to have a little game and encourage people to interact in that way. So every guest that comes on is going to have like a fun favorite word. And when you hear the word, it's on your bingo card and you want to get a bingo. And if you get a bingo, then you are entered to win one of 3 gift cards. I've got a $25, a $50, and a $75. And there are gift cards for bookstores, of course, because we're supporting local independent bookstores. So I'll mail those out if you are the winners. That is it for today. Let me just wrap up the chat here. We left off with Maggie here. I have metal and vinyl straws because the bamboo ones can't be sterilized properly. Yes, I got a mango lassi the other day and used my metal straw at home because it was takeout. And I was like, this works really well. This is perfect. I don't get to use it often, but like it was perfect with the lassi. I know someone who uses metal straws. They're pretty handy. Yes, I wanted to be that person who has like the roll-up cutlery that they can bring places, but I just never wanted to spend $30 or more on like the little kit, and I haven't made one for myself, so it's fine. It doesn't come up too often anyway, but Maggie says, I need to read the Catastrophe book. Yes, it's so good. You might win a $25 gift certificate. It's $29.99, but you'd almost get there if you play the bingo. So you can find the bingo cards on my Instagram and on my Blue Sky. And in case anyone is not on Blue Sky, and please don't look down on a new social network, it's just a smaller community to try to weed out the bots and the mean people. So feel free to join and follow me there. That's where you will find the 2 bingo cards that are out. I will put out the 3rd bingo card, and that is all. There's just 3 different colors, and so you can choose whichever arrangement you want. Some of them have a few different words, but most of them are on all. The plastic hurts worse than the metal, in my opinion, because the metal is more blunt and the plastic can be sharper, just so you know. They usually have rubber at the mouth part. Mine does not. Interesting. How? I don't know what that's about, Kappa. I think it's about the chat, so I'll just let it go. Maggie says, I've had the same set of vinyl straws for 10 years and have broken my family from plastic straws, so it's a small win. Excellent. Melissa says, I love metal straws. So far, I haven't ever injured myself on them. That will be interesting. Yes, Agitation August. Melissa says, saw your upcoming interview schedule for Agitation August. Looks great. Thank you. They are not for Amazon because we are not supporting Amazon. I sad mad right now because of Emily Pike's murder. Arizona and soon New Mexico and then Dakotas will have turquoise alerts for missing Native children. Ooh, not sure how that relates to the discussion, but okay, we've got news. We've got breaking news on the channel. Yes, Melissa is also on Blue Sky. Okay, so yay. So we can connect on there. All right. And then just a reminder, because I had this at the top of the hour and you may not have caught it. Next Sunday is going to be part of the Truth and Reconciliation for the Climate series. So same theme. I'm going to have my friend Ali Shaw, who is an independent bookstore owner here in Portland, on to talk about what we're doing about environmental activism and or community goals, because she's a great one for standing up for the community. And she's one of the people who's running a network for people to meet and talk about how they can resist some of the craziness that is happening on these Portland streets, which is pretty dang crazy, y'all. I don't know. It's probably not in your local news, but it's pretty scary. So Maggie says, part of Agitation August, how needs and crimes against Native populations are ignored because we are such a small portion of the population. Oh, okay. Yes. No one has a Native focused book, but there are obviously going to be like marginalized populations, of which Native populations in the US are one, concern some of the issues that we break up. I'm going to put together a list of all of the topics that are being covered by people's books that they're bringing. So we can see sort of a shorthand instead of the little tiny covers. But yeah. Missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people is the movement that I'm most familiar with in terms of that issue, but we don't have one of those books on our list. But this could be a series that takes off and people do spin-offs, which would be great. Because there's so many issues to keep abreast of. So thanks everyone for watching. This has been a fantastic discussion about a really interesting book, The Great Disruption by Paul Gilding. If you can get an old copy, go ahead. But also, this is a great one for people who are already involved like Maggie and know a lot of the facts. I Want a Better Catastrophe by Andrew Boyd. And if these issues are your bag, definitely join Climathon. It's a year-long readathon hosted by myself and Tasman and Anya. Their channels are in the description. So you can read 12 books or you can just read a few of the different prompts. You are welcome either way, because reading and learning and being curious is what we're trying to promote. So remember, take care of yourselves, diversify that reading list, and take a tiny step. We'll be here to encourage and support. Thanks, everyone, and happy reading.